Freestyle watercolor without stamps is a great way to practice your technique and create easy, clean and simple rainbow watercolor cards. I'm using my favorite watercolor paper today. This is Saunders Waterford High White, and this is actually the rough version. I would say more often or not, if I'm stamping, I use the cold press version. I really like the texture of the paper, so I'm not one to use hot press paper too often. But if I'm not going to be stamping, then it's a great opportunity to pull out my rough watercolor paper and use that. I really enjoy the texture, and it's super hard to stamp on rough watercolor paper, so freestyle watercolor is a great occasion to use that. So I'm starting off with, I thought I would just create some really simple candles. You can see that I marked off 2 lines so that I would have a top and the bottom. And then I added a tick mark every ½ inch just to keep myself equally distanced between the candles. I have a number 8 pointed round brush, but you could also use a flat brush for this technique if, depending upon the thickness of the candles that you want. My first candle was made with quinacridone rose, and next I have pyrrole scarlet. I'll have all the names of the colors posted up above, and then of course all of the supplies will be linked down below. I'm using my Daniel Smith watercolors today, and I'm just using the color straight out of the pan. I'm not going to mix any colors. I'll just use them just straight as they come, and I'm putting a little bit of a thicker mixture or more concentrated watercolor down at the base of the candle. I'm not looking for completely perfect candles here. I like that kind of rough watercolor edge, and if they're not completely straight, I'm not too worried about that either. After I was done with the candles, I let them dry for a couple of minutes before I moved on to the flames. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to smear anything, which I have a bad habit of doing, so I did let it dry. You can see I put a little dot at the top of each candle just to, again, keep me centered there. And you can see that the Hansa Yellow Medium isn't completely covering that graphite there, but I'm going to drop in quinacridone Gold, which is a darker, warmer yellow, and that's going to cover that just little dot of graphite just fine, so no worries there. The watercolor will trap your graphite, so if you're using a light color like the Hansa Yellow Medium, just be aware that your graphite will show through if you don't cover it up with a darker color. For the candle wicks, I switched to a number 2 pointed round brush because it doesn't hold very much water at all, and that's going to help me get a precise line. So I'm using a wet on dry technique, though I'll tell you my brush is very dry. I just have thick indigo pigment on there, the watercolor, and that's allowing me to get a nice sharp line versus if I had used the sharp point on the number 8, the number 8 would have held too much water. This is the Happy Birthday stamp set from Wow, and I'm just going to stamp that with the Wow Embossing Ink. I stamp it a couple times because, again, this is a rough watercolor paper, so I want to make sure I get in all those nooks and crannies. I grabbed one of the new trios. This is English Garden. This has the most beautiful green in it, plus a Twiggy, which is a brown color. It's almost like a purpley brown. And Petalicious, which is a glitter embossing powder that pretty closely matches my quinacridone rose candle there. Here I'm just showing you that green embossing powder. This is another card that I did with the Simon Says Stamp Magnolia stamp set, and I'll post a video for that over on my channel at Notable Ink. So I'm just going to sprinkle this on. Make sure you shake up your container before you use it on your project. And when you're flicking your project, really light flicks. You don't want all of your glitter to come off. And you can see what's mostly left over here is the really fine glitter that's in this. Very little, if any of that, is actual embossing powder. So I'll take it off to the side and blow on it to get the excess off, and then we'll go ahead and heat set it. Now, anytime you're using a glitter embossing powder, make sure you start heating from behind so that you don't blow your glitter away. And there we go. So I've grabbed the Wow Mixed Media Embossing Brush, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that embossing gel to the candles because, of course, those need to be sparkly as well. You can see that I've added a sub-sentiment, and I just stamped that on a white piece of cardstock and then backed it with some black cardstock just to make it pop off the page a little bit more. Here I have the ice cream embossing powder, which is from the Fairground trio that I just used in one of my latest videos. So I'll link that up above or put it in the description down below. Here's the finished card. It came together really easily. I love how bright the colors are on these candles, and it was just so easy to do, you guys. Super easy, clean and simple design. For the next card, I grabbed a scrap of watercolor paper. I keep even the smallest little scraps for projects like these and even just swatching. I started off with Hansa Yellow Medium. I meant to start off with red, but yellow came first in my palette. And you can see that I'm putting a little bit of quinacridone gold down before I add the green, because I didn't want the green to mix too much with that Pyrrole Scarlet. It would have really turned brown. So the quinacridone gold, which is that warm yellow, was a nice buffer in between the green and the red. It kind of saves me from the mistake I made starting with the yellow. Next up, I had sap green, then I had phthalo green blue shade. Now I'm using phthalo blue green shade, and then rose of ultramarine. If you don't have a convenience purple in your palette, you can mix this exact color by mixing quinacridone rose and ultramarine. Those are the two pigments that make up this color. Make sure you let your watercolor strip completely dry before you do your die cutting. Otherwise, you might not get nice sharp edges on the cutting. So just make sure that you have let it dry all the way. I have the CZ Design Hello die here. This hat also includes the shadow, and I'll cut the shadow out of vellum, but I don't show that on the video. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop the die out. Make sure that you keep those extra pieces, and I'm just gonna run this along the card. So this is basically going to be a gradient sentiment strip, and I decided I wanted those black edges on either side to really pop it off the page. Rather than embossing a full kind of thick area on the card, I decided to use some score tape and just sprinkle the embossing powder on those. And so I have black Glint here, which is a glitter embossing powder. I love this powder. It's so great, you guys. So I'm just going to shake that over the score tape. Now this you can flick pretty vigorously because it's going to stick to the score tape. If you guys have used score tape before, you know that it is super strong adhesive. So there's no issues with you flicking it. And I'll go ahead and heat emboss that. And you can see it gets all nice and sparkly. And then I'll go ahead and set my sentiment in there. Now, once I get this glue on, you can see that I totally drop it on my card and not where it needs to go. So then I end up trimming this out. So you guys can do this a couple ways. You can do the strips like this, or you could just go ahead and kind of measure a piece of cardstock that's a little bit larger than your watercolor piece and just emboss the entire piece. Totally up to you. At the time I thought this was easier, but it ended up kind of being a little bit of a pain since I dropped the glue on it. So I'll just put this in here, and then I guess the advantage of this is that if you wanted to pop this piece up on your card, you could. So make sure you fit in the original die cut here, and then you can glue in and make sure that the inside of the O and the E are in the exact place they need to be. Be mindful of the gradient on your watercolor before you put the O in to make sure that it is in the right direction and that the colors match up. And then I'll just trim off the excess. The Nuvo surface sweep is perfect for getting rid of any excess embossing powder. I use it all the time with my embossing. If you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to like and subscribe down below. And I got this glued on without any errors, so that's good. I just glued it directly to the card. I didn't pop it up. And I did add a sub-sentiment with the Hello stamp set. I love how those sparkly black strips just totally finish off this card. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you soon with more inspiration.